And this isn't in any particular order, but there are certain themes that, to me, emerged from the two sessions that we had yesterday. One is this question of American identity or American identities, and I know we struggled with that at the National Museum of American History. What does it mean to be an American? That's what many of us in the public history field are struggling with, and trying to help our staff, our boards, our audiences define that or answer that question. And maybe the question is, what is it? There are multiple answers. There are multiple American identities. I often found that when we tried to answer that question, we really were asking the question, what does it mean to be an American history museum? So it was an institutional definition as much as it is a definition of that larger question, what does it mean to be an American? And it's clear from the presentations we had yesterday that the stage is expanding, continues to expand as we try to answer that question. The other takeaway message that I thought was very important is the element of risk-taking, of that our organizations, our museums, our historic sites, our historical organizations should not be afraid to take some chances in our programming, in our collecting, in our online presence. I think that was a very interesting theme that ran through many of the presentations yesterday. The other theme of relevance, making history matter. I had a conversation with Gary Sandley last night at the reception, and we were talking about how my question about the American placement U.S. history exam, which still is on my agenda, to try to align what students are expected to know with what we do in the public history field, especially in terms of material culture and historic sites, and how we can make that history matter when there's so many expectations in a formal way for students to be proficient in critical thinking skills, and how do we engage them also in civic engagement and making them understand, or helping them understand, that historic sites and museums and material culture collections are also important evidence for them to consider. So the relevance of what we're doing in this field is another theme that came across to me. And at the same time, we were talking last night at dinner about the fact that there was a question, I think, Nicola Longford, is Nicola here? I don't see her right now, but Nicola raised the question at dinner, how do we know if what we're doing matters? How do we know if we're engaging our audience and making a difference to our audience, especially to young people? And I think you'll hear this morning how that is happening. Certainly the presentation that Mary Elliott gave on the National Museum of African American History and Culture, where in 18 months 5 million people, more than 5 million people, have visited that museum, that is a signal to me that people care about history, they're hungry for new approaches to history. And so I think we can say that, yes, history matters, and that we're reaching the audience with innovative presentations. I think when you hear about the Hamilton Education Project, and all of us know how the musical Hamilton has generated so much new interest in the founding period of American history. So I think there are some techniques out there and some tools and some new institutions that are demonstrating that history does matter and that we are reaching a new audience in new ways. Connected to that, another theme that came across yesterday was the idea of sharing authority with the audience. I know that some of my colleagues, especially those of us who have been in the field for many decades, let's say, are not that comfortable with the idea of sharing authority with the audience. But that came across as an important theme yesterday, especially in the in both sessions, but especially in the digital technology, the tools of digital technology that we have now that allow us to engage the audience and allow the audience to share their expertise. And what I have found is the more that we share authority with the audience, the more trusted we are. I have found that the audience, visitors, will come back if we engage them and ask for their opinion of what does it mean to them, or we ask them to post post-it notes at the end of our exhibits, as we saw illustrations yesterday that I think Sean Kelly was showing us from the Eastern State Penitentiary. The more we do that, the more trust we have from the audience in our own expertise. So I think that sharing authority is a very important takeaway message from yesterday's presentation. Another takeaway for me was this idea of emotional space. That was mentioned in several of the presentations, that we have not only to present documents and material culture and provide space for that kind of research and that kind of information, but we also have to provide emotional space for the public. And that's something that public history institutions can do and often do. And I was reminded of the theatrical performances that we staged at the American History Museum around the Woolworth's lunch counter, where visitors were invited to participate in a reenactment of a sit-in, not at the lunch counter itself, but right in front of the lunch counter, and were introduced to the principles of nonviolent protest. And that was a very emotional experience for many of our visitors. And so I think this concept of emotional space is something that is very important in what we're doing. And then the idea of demystifying the historical process, how we know what we know. I think one of the most effective exhibitions we had at the American History Museum was the conservation of the Star-Spangled Banner. For many years, many of you probably remember that we had the conservators working on the flag in full view of the public. And in fact, when we finally finished that process and we put the flag back on display in a very, I think, powerful and emotional display of the flag, many visitors said they really miss the conservation demonstration because they've learned so much about what we do in our field. I think the same is true with archaeology. The public archaeology programs at Montpelier and Monticello and Jamestown are really effective ways of demystifying what we do in public history. And finally, what I have come to regard as a very important topic and a very important challenge for us, and it came across to me in many of the presentations yesterday, was the notion of governance, the issue of governance and institutional support. And for the past several years, I've been working with organizations around the country, doing executive searches, for example, strategic planning, working with boards at various levels, fundraising, and I've come to realize just how unique it is for the public history programming in this country to be managed and governed by largely a volunteer group of citizens around the country. So institutional support and governance is a critical issue in this field of public history. I've been working, someone asked me this morning, what have I been up to? And I've been working at the Presidio in California and the Seward House Museum in Auburn, New York, and the Willa Cather Foundation in Nebraska, and the Journey Through Hallowed Ground, the Hyrick House Museum here in Washington, D.C. And at all of these places, I have become convinced that we need to pay as much attention as possible to recruiting good board members, recruiting excellent staff, finding ways to support them, and for us to really value the governance structure that we have in this country, which is largely a private effort. We do have great examples like the Smithsonian and the National Park Service of public support for public history. But if you look around the country, it's largely driven by private effort, and it's not something we should take for granted. In the spirit of symposium, I'd like to spend just a couple of minutes in inviting any comments you have about what you took away from the sessions yesterday, or anything I've said. And please come forward if you would like to comment. I know it's early in the morning, but this is your program as much as it is mine. Anyone? Everything I said made perfect sense? Okay. Well, then we'll move to our first session. And I was interested yesterday when Dana Allen Greel spoke about the death of Linda Brown Thompson, who was one of the students who were the subject of the Brown versus Board of Education case that involved Topeka school system and several other school districts around the country. And Linda Brown Thompson died on Sunday of this past Sunday. And it reminded me that the civil rights movement largely took place, or a big chapter of the civil rights movement took place in schools.